Welcome back,
To the third option. I'm Rick Manis, and this is my lovely wife,
Judi
Judy.
Manis. And we together are Rick and Judi Manis, but we also host The Third Option, the podcast that you're either listening to or watching. And we have been talking about,
The spirit of understanding, a facet of the spirit of the Holy Spirit, a facet of the Holy Spirit, a facet of the love of God. We've enjoyed it. We've been talking about that for the last few episodes. I shared a couple of stories about my own journey and how the love of God drew me into more understanding and a real place of beauty in certain areas. And you have a story today to share
yeah,
because
yeah.
we want to talk about understanding. We've talked about having understanding and empathy, for other people mostly.
hmm
But this one, we want to talk about having understanding and empathy for yourself, right?
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes we are the hardest on ourselves and are the most stringent on improving ourselves or becoming a better person because we don't have a lot of understanding about ourselves. And we just think we need to shape up, get it together, believe the right thing, refuse the wrong thing. And sometimes I think it's a little more complex than that. And the
Yeah.
understanding helps with that.
It's funny when I just thought of when you said that is like we may begin with maybe shame or uh, insecurities or inferiority complexes or something about us that we want to change, and then we can get into sort of a maybe it's a mostly a rel maybe mo I think it's mostly a religious thing, but where it's like you're saying, "Okay, now s get better,"
Yeah.
"Straighten up, start thinking right," "Become this better person," but then there's still struggle in that. There's still
Mhm.
there's shame in that because there's a lot of failure
Yeah.
in that a lot of times.
And I think it's what leads to kind of putting on a mask or projecting this um, healed, strong, confident self that there may be some elements of truth to it, but underneath there's like a wound or something that needs addressing. That because of the mask, we won't even touch it or
I've
address it.
heard you talk about trying to create another story about ourselves
Yeah,
because we didn't like our past story,
yeah.
so we try to create this other story about ourselves, a better story about ourselves, a better version of us, and
I,
we think it'll make us feel better about
Yeah, and
us.
I think it's normal. You wanna put yourself in your best light, but r the truth, the authenticity, that is where your real healing is, your real, ability to receive and give God's love, I think. And for myself, I have a history, and I've talked about it and shared this story on this podcast before, but I have a history of um, abuse and neglect and being abusive to others. So, growing up, I grew up on a real small farm in Pennsylvania. Um, we had a garden. We paid like $60 a month for our house
It was a rented
place.
farmhouse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we had animals and garden and all that. But so we were renting from this gentleman who owned a lot of land in that area. And he had two grandsons who were my age, a little bit older. Um, I think both of them were a little bit older than I. And they were
A terror.
a terror in our neighborhood and particularly with my family. And what they would always say is that we were like the scum of the earth. Like they were something because their grandfather owned it all, and we were just slime because we were
Like
kind of
like, "This is
renting
our
them
land.
in. Yeah,
It's not even your place."
yeah, and that somehow our personhood was very much less than. And it's so interesting because I was little And it I mean, from the time I was little, but also up until my teen years, and there was like a group of boys in that neighborhood, but particularly those 2 were very mean-spirited to us, and I think from looking back in hindsight that I took those words, they just came into me. And, like, my little soft, brain, my developing personality kind of accepted that
Yeah.
as true.
So it put more shame on you.
Mhm, and the shame that we were poor, poorer. I don't think we were, I mean, we had food on our table, but we didn't have a lot of extras, but anyway, it just put a lot of shame into me as a human.
Yeah,
And
something like you were an inferior being, you were a less
yes,
than person,
and
there were some people better than you.
yeah, and not just me, my whole family.
Yeah,
And what I'll say about my mom and dad is they were doing the best they possibly could. I love my mom, I love my dad, but they had their own issues and their own childhood, um, upbringing that they were dealing with, and they really weren't emotionally available to help us navigate and understand what was happening. We were kind of left to ourselves to figure it out. And it became, abuser and abusee, that they had all the power. And if they liked you, you were having a great day. And if they were angry and hateful towards you, you were just going to have to suffer. And I remember feeling like even later in life when I would hear the word Satan or the devil, uh, their faces would come to mind because I was so terrorized by them. um, I mean, they would take snakes and like kind of torment us and put us in uh, these bales of hay. Like we had this barn with all these little compartments and little tunnels and stuff like that, and they were just very terrorizing. I want to pause for a minute and say these 2 boys who, I mean, I almost attribute evil to them. They were raised in an alcoholic home, I believe, and so they had their own terror that they were dealing with, and they were passing it on to us. So it's sort of this, unending cycle because even as I was abused, I learned to abuse others, and so it was just this cycle, and hurt people hurt other people. And, I think one of the ways I dealt with feeling abused was I wanted to die. Like, I felt too much pain. It was too painful for me, and I didn't understand how other people could bear it, and so my MO or my what I went to was, "I gotta get out of here. I don't wanna hurt anyone. I don't wanna hurt my mom and dad. I don't want them to feel bad. I just want out." But I will say this, that there was anger inside of me, but it was being really pushed down and managed because it wasn't safe to have anger. And in later years, the suicide attempts led to me being hospitalized in a psychiatric ward, and I was diagnosed as schizophrenic. And while I was in there, very heavily medicated, I remember having feelings of intense anger. And when that would happen, they would take me and strap me down. Like they would tie my hands down and there's something about having legitimate anger not being allowed to be expressed.
mm,
I remember another time where I was angry and I got beaten for being angry, like really beaten to the fact that my legs were black and blue. And it was like, it is not safe for you, Judy, to express anger. And so it became very pushed down and I became um, kind of very small in some ways.
You think that kind of thing tells you that what you feel is wrong and what you want to express is wrong, and
Mhm.
then probably so therefore who you are is
Is
wrong.
wrong,
Yeah.
right, yeah,
Yeah, we're talking about understanding ourselves.
yeah, and I think at a point, I did get a lot of therapy, I got a lot of help. um, One thing that I was told, in this kind of healing group for sexual abuse is I was told, the victim does not have to forgive. And I remember that kind of hit me funny, like, well, isn't that what good people do? They forgive other people. But in looking back on it, what I see is a forced forgiveness isn't a real forgiveness.
Mhm.
So
And
if
religion can it can feel like religion is imposing making it a law, right?
I think it happens a lot in religion, is that something good is made into a formula, and then it doesn't have any power to it. It doesn't have any real authenticness to it because it's just a thing I have to do.
That's why people will say the right words, "Oh, I forgive them," but they in their gut, they still haven't let it go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And for me, for a long time, I could not forgive. I even at times wanted to and would pray to and ask God to help me with. But every time I saw in my life areas that had been affected because of these things that had happened to me, I would just
Mhm.
couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I got no
Yeah,
apology,
because
no
it was still all their
acknowledgement.
fault,
Yeah,
really.
and
Yeah.
now I've gotta pay the price
Yeah.
for all they did. Meanwhile, knowing that there were people paying the price for what I did, and I didn't know how to fix that even, except to acknowledge and apologize and, ask for forgiveness. But it was, a lot of turmoil inside of me that I guess I didn't understand for a long time, and so it just kind of drove me,
Mm,
um, when you're kind of unconsciously, like, never happy with yourself,
mhm,
never satisfied, always trying to get better, always trying to improve. Um, and some
mm,
of those things, I think aren't bad in themselves. It's when it's almost an addiction that there is nothing good about me. I remember sharing with you about, this idea, when I first heard, like, God loves you just like you are. And I remember inside of me was like, no, like, I don't want him to love me just as I
you don't wanna
am.
stay like that.
I'm unacceptable. I
Yeah,
am unacceptable.
yeah.
I'm an unacceptable human being.
You think that's why a lot of people have a problem with grace because they're afraid that if you just accept that his grace is sufficient, that you won't change anymore, and nobody likes the way they are.
Yeah,
They wanna become something better,
yeah.
and what's missing is the identity of how beautiful and precious we really are,
Mhm,
and it's covered because our actions and our feelings and our thoughts may not be beautiful,
mhm,
and so it's easy to accept that as that's us. That's who we are as a person rather than knowing
mhm,
who we really understanding ourselves the
mhm.
way God does.
Yeah. I think too, part of my pain or part of that suicidal tendency was believing that God wanted these things to happen to me. He was orchestrating them. He
Mm.
was, actively tormenting me. And
Yeah,
when the God of the universe is against you, or you believe that, there's no hope.
you roll
Like,
your
there's
eyes.
no,
Yeah,
so I just sort of, was like, "Okay, I've heard that if you commit suicide, you go to hell, but this feels like hell. So
it
it
can't be
it
worse than
can't be worse
this.
than this, and I have to I have to go," basically. But I think in first of all, coming to a point where I asked God genuinely from my heart, "Who are you and what is true about you?" Because what I've read and what I've heard you don't sound very attractive, very nice. There are times in my life where I feel like I'm begging and you're not responding. And I just started to dabble in my own, like a relationship with this God of the universe. And I did get into recovery therapy and all of that. And when I was in recovery, one of the things that really helped me was I wrote out all these people that I had um, resentments towards, meaning when you think of them, you're re-feeling the yucky feelings, like you're not free. And I would just write them out. I'd write what happened and I would begin to pray for each one of them. And it really wasn't something that I enjoyed doing. It was something that I was desperate
Mhm.
to get help. I feel like I I had been told or I had heard that those resentments, those things were what was fueling my addictions and my,
Mhm.
ways of coping to mask the pain. They were being fueled by that. And until those things were released, I was going to keep on I was gonna keep on ending up in a psych ward, like, these things were gonna keep happening to me, and I so desperately was like, "I either want out or I need to get better." So I started doing that, and, I got relief. I got a significant relief, and, I think, sometimes when you do these sort of I don't know, steps or things that bring relief, you start to formalize them and like, this is the way we deal with it. And there's no other way. And I've dealt with it and I'm done. And now we're moving on. And then a little while later, you realize, oh, God is showing me something new and
Mhm.
something more. And even though those things were good and I have nothing against them, they weren't the end of everything. They weren't the end result of
Mhm.
everything.
Right.
And they weren't necessarily for everyone in the world. It was for me at that time and that moment was very helpful. Um, as I grew in my relationship with the Lord and as I began to embrace the grace of God and the unconditional love of God, that was tricky for me. That was something outside my realm that really pushed on what do you really believe? And I remember thinking to myself, I'd been a Christian for probably 10 years and I would always say God loved me. But I started to realize I, from how I'm behaving and the things I'm saying to myself, I can't, I can't really believe that.
Yeah.
And I started just asking the question, what if I believe that God saw me vulnerabilities, abuses, the anger, all of that. And he knew me and loved that person. Well, what would that be like? And I just
That's
started
a good
considering it. Yeah.
that's a good thing to consider.
Yeah.
For anybody watching that might be struggling with that truth. How
Mhm.
could God really love me? Just to consider it. What if it were true?
Mhm.
That's a big one. I think that's very helpful.
Yes, and I started seeing the whys behind I wasn't just this broken person. There was a reason behind, the inappropriate anger or the
Yeah.
paranoia or the resentments.
You were not created inferior.
Right.
Inferiority was put upon you, and the
Mhm.
shame and the pain of all of
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
that came, but that was not who you were from God,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and I carried it, and even in kind of letting some of that go, it would present itself in different situations. Um, and and I would just have to look at it again and just say, "Okay, Lord, you see me. maybe I'm not behaving in the way that I would love to be behaving, and yet you know why, and
Yeah.
you understand why, and you're gentle with me, you're not harsh. Sometimes the way we grew up, it's the way we learn to deal with ourselves.
Mm.
Sometimes that harsh and just get over it and you know, don't cry, just
Yeah.
deal with it and you can learn some really amazing um survival techniques. Like you can really the fact that I was able to really do a lot of the things that I was able to do in the midst of all of that, I
Yeah.
think is amazing testimony to the human resilience.
Yeah.
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 But, in trying to kind of connect with me and who I am, I've had to really relearn a lot of things and embrace that compassion for what I've gone through, what I've believed about myself,
That's so good.
where I've been.
Compassion for yourself. We've been using the word empathy a lot lately in this series that we've been discussing. And that's, because the tendency is to hate that self and
Mhm.
try to become a good self
Yeah.
somehow. But when God made us, He said it's good. Um, we get corrupted.
Mhm.
Our souls get corrupted in our mind and our emotions and our desires. But um, that person is worthy of love, right?
Mhm.
Even that one that went through all those things and did all these horrible things is
Mhm.
still a person worthy of love, and you can have compassion and understanding,
Mhm.
right?
Right. I think I've seen a lot of that reflected in you in that there's been times where, like, the emotions will just they're volatile, like, they just come up, and you've dealt with me with a lot of gentleness, and even in not completely
Mm,
understanding, you've been willing to give me, uh, time, and you've been willing to, uh, let me explore
mm.
and have grace for me, and I
That
appreciate that.
that yeah, that comes back to that understanding we're talking about because in those moments, I know who you are still.
Mhm,
And sometimes our actions are not they're reflective of how we're feeling or what we're thinking and or something, but they're not necessarily reflective of who we are as a person. And we were talking, earlier this morning, you and I, before the podcast, about how God knows us. He
mhm,
knows who we are.
mhm.
And a lot of times people that they think the big question is, do we know God? Do we know God? Well, do any of us know God very much at all, really? I mean, we some of us might a little.
He's so big,
He's so
how
big,
could
and
they
I'm thankful for what we do know about
Mhm,
him, but we can be assured that he knows us.
mhm.
He knows who we are.
Yeah, I think the biggest switch for me, the biggest help for me was to see that God was not against me and that he wasn't some magician in the sky with a puppet strings just trying to orchestrate uh,
Yeah,
hard things for me and great things for others,
yeah,
that he wasn't this magician in the sky, but that he was someone good, someone who's revealed in the life and the teachings of Jesus. Like he's revealed room for other people to be themselves. It's correlated to our own rejection of ourselves and our own stories. And so I think applying that spirit of understanding to ourselves can be very
and
beneficial.
having compassion because of that understanding that your shortcomings, if it's, for instance, I'm trying to forgive, but it's hard to forgive, or I'm trying to do the right thing in this area and I struggle with it. When you have that understanding of the Lord and you can be compassionate upon yourself.
Yeah.
Give grace to yourself.
Mhm.
I realize once you realize that God's giving grace to you, then you can start giving grace to yourself too, right?
Yeah,
It's
that's
beautiful. It's a beautiful story. I thank
yes.
you for opening up and sharing it. I know you're bearing your soul when you do that, but it's beautiful. Thank
Yeah,
you.
a little vulnerable.
Yeah. Thank you for watching, guys. And we hope this is a blessing to you or somebody. And if you think it would be beneficial to somebody, please share this. Share our podcast. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And we do welcome all of your comments, pro and con. And and sometimes, the comments or questions, they inspire us on other things that maybe we could or should talk about, that
Mhm.
would be helpful to people. But anyway, thanks for watching or listening to this podcast, and we hope you have a great day.
Bye-bye.